So an interesting headline we came across recently, and it's from our friends at the Christian Institute, and what they said was Ofsted must focus on the quality of education, not identity politics. Now, there have been a whole range of articles in and around the question of the teaching of gender identity and so on to children and how we go about it. And indeed, after comments from Ofsted that things need to be communicated more in schools, and that I think the phrase from Amanda Spielman, who's the head of Ofsted, was we need to make sure that children know that some people prefer not to get married, some to somebody of the opposite sex, and that sometimes there are families that have two mummies or daddies. Now, while we would want children to be aware of the realities of what's going on, an awful lot of Christian and Muslim parents have been raising concerns that teaching this to primary school age children especially is not age appropriate. So what is it that our friends at the Christian Institute want to raise? What is it that they want to say? And what is it perhaps that more of us need to take seriously? Well, joining me on the line to talk about it and to explore it is Ciarán Kelly, Deputy Director of the Christian Institute. And of course, Ciarán, people can find out more about your perspective on this as we're chatting by having a look at your website, which is
christian.org.uk. Yeah, thanks for the plug, Paul.
As simple as that, christian.org.uk.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is, I suspect, a story which has been simmering under the surface for quite a while now.
Well, what's kicked this off, you see, is that the government has been looking at reviewing how schools deal with sex education. It's a bit of a rebrand at primary level, and they're calling it relationships education. And there's some differences, but we can get into those over the course of the conversation. But if we think of those as a package, and it's a response really to a lot of pressure that they've come under to say, well, it's not fit for the modern world. It's not. It was the previous incarnation was written in a pre-internet world, and kids are exposed to all sorts of things now which need to be dealt with. All of which you can't have a lot of an issue with. The idea of some of the stuff that's in there, which talks about kids, managing kids' screen time, the worries of the kind of people that children might encounter when they're online. That's good. That's sensible stuff. But what we're concerned about, and what umpteen parents are concerned about, is that running alongside that is the LGBT issues. And as I said, that there's this distinction between primary and secondary school, but in its simplest sense, children as young as 5 can be taught about, under these changes, children as young as 5 can be taught about LGBT issues. There aren't boundaries on that, so who knows where that could go. So that's the area of concern, and there's an awful lot of parents who are concerned about it. And bringing this back to Amanda Spielman. So Amanda Spielman, she's the head of Ofsted, and she has said, well, not to put too fine upon it, parents who've got concerns, they sort of need to get over themselves. And in the past, she's talked about muscular liberalism. Schools need to kind of fight the good fight for muscular liberalism, and she talks about that in the context of opposition to Christian values. So when she talks about we want to see these things in primary schools and secondary schools, she's not coming from a neutral place. She's not. She's coming up from a place of a philosophical perspective. Yeah. So that's what the concerns are. So there was 100, more than 100,000 people signed a petition expressing concerns about the content. Because there's two things here. There's the content of what's in these lessons, and also the fact that the parental right withdrawal, which has been in place, for forever essentially, is being undermined or constrained or ditched altogether, depending upon the school and quite where you fit in the age group.
Surely there are in place already the necessary procedures to ensure that any lesson on any topic is going to be delivered in an age-appropriate way with age-appropriate content, isn't it?
Well, there has been the case. Teachers had a lot of teachers and schools have been able to work this out in conjunction with parents. So that's where the autonomy has lain in that combination of parental influence working with schools at a local level. But what's changing is this centralisation of these values and a kind of a mandate that's coming down that says you shall teach these particular things. And on the one hand, you see, Damien Hines, who's the Education Secretary, he's been saying, well, it's not really about this LGBT stuff. It's about the kind of other things we were talking about, internet trolling and good relationships and that sort of thing. And yet the thing that's got most publicity, the thing that's been pushed most, as Amanda Spielman kind of picked up on, really, is the LGBT agenda, and that's the thing that they've been most reluctant to get rid of. In fact, they've talked about it infusing all areas of the curriculum. So that's the issue, is that this balance of power that was with schools and parents has essentially shifted under these changes towards the state. And that was something which, in the debates that happened last week, it was interesting that there was Damien Hines was announcing all this was happening, and pretty much at the same time there was a debate about in Westminster Hall about these parental concerns. But his announcement about it happening was ahead of this debate, saying about really whether it should happen or not. So that's the concern, but that got picked up in the debates. That there's this shift of power from parents who know their kids best. I mean, let's be clear about that. Parents know their children best. They know what is age appropriate for their children. The influence that they had over schools to work with parents, to work with head teachers, to work with governors, that has shifted towards the state, who are saying you shall teach these things and it's got to be done in this kind of way.
Yeah, and I take your point, but surely we live in a world where we have a broad church now perspective on these topics, and the reality of LGBT issues are an integral part of society. We do need children from a very young age to be taught about this, to try and offset some of the impact of prejudice and of language use and so on that has caused problems in the past, don't we?
No, I don't think so. What we need to teach kids is that human beings are worthy of respect. That's I think the focus on particular sets of characteristics is teaching children identity politics. It's teaching them differences, and it's the common parlance is othering. You have these particular set of characteristics that puts you into this slice of humanity. Yes. You have a different set of characteristics that puts you into a different slice of humanity. And we're slicing up people according to these various characteristics. And really what schools should be teaching is they should be teaching respect for one another, of course. Why should we be teaching respect for one another? Because we're human beings. If you wanted to put a Christian line on it, I mean, not every school can do this, of course, but you'd be talking about people being made in the image of God, and there's an intrinsic value from that. Not every school can do that, but you can still talk about respect for people as people, not because they have fall into a particular band. Because the flip side of that is, if you don't fall into one of these particular bands that have been deemed to be kind of separate and kind of worthy of specific teaching and worthy of pulling out from the crowd, if you like, where does that leave you? What questions does that leave in your mind about your particular set of distinctive characteristics? If you're teaching children, respect the boys and girls around you because they're human beings, they're worthy of respect, I think that builds for a good culture within the school, and that's what a lot of Christian Christian schools do. Is they'll teach that respect for one another because you're human beings. So I think that's the right place to start. And so the concern, rather than slicing people up.
Yeah, and so the concern is we might actually be introducing opportunities for othering, opportunities for discrimination and division, rather than actually treating that basic premise that people are worthy of being loved and respected, as we would say, in a biblical way. Is there also a concern here that this focus is perhaps overshadowing the I quoted earlier on from your report that parents are actually saying we want you to be focusing more on educational attainment rather than just on identity politics.
Yeah. So, Ofsted have got a job to do. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They are there to see if schools are providing the kind of provision that they ought to be. And I mean, there's a fundamental principle at stake here that would be worth just mentioning, is the fact that schools, or the state, if you like, educates on behalf of parents. Schools kind of outsource it, education of their children to the state, and the state provides that. But fundamentally, they're doing it on behalf of parents. It's not something that they should be able to dictate terms on. And so Ofsted has a role in saying, well, is the school doing well enough in maths? Is it doing well enough in English? Is it doing stuff in the things that children need to be taught? But how it's shifted, Paul, is that it has started to place at the top of the pile, really, what values a school is teaching. Now, it's good for schools have an ethos of one kind or another, but they're going to differ on that. And parents often like that difference, and often they like the kind of positive ethos that comes from a faith-based and particularly Christian-based schooling, in terms of the Christian value set that comes across in education. But the issue is that Ofsted have come in, and under what's been termed British values, there's this sense of, well, the kind of values that you ought to be teaching kids, and we're going to grade you on that. And the clash comes when they go into let's say, a Christian school, and this is of the case. This has been the case, where they might be teaching you respect for one another because we're made in the image of God. That's the perspective that they're coming from. And they're coming up against an Ofsted mindset, which is, no, that's not good enough. You need to be teaching about these protected characteristics. You need to be teaching about people's identities, particularly as LGBT. That's the emphasis. I'm not saying that's everything that they're interested in. I'm just saying that's the emphasis that has come across. And that's why you have all these instances of Ofsted inspectors asking really pretty inappropriate questions about, young girls, and have they had a boyfriend, and what do you know about two men being able to marry each other, and these sorts of things. Young sort of 11, 12-year-old girls, or whoever they might be, or boys for that matter, that's inappropriate question. That has nothing to do with the education of children, and that's what parents are reacting to. And it's not been isolated instance. There's been a number of schools, Christian, Jewish schools in particular, who've been affected in this way.